Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Cruz, and I'm the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. Welcome to the final program on our final day of our second annual summit, taking place on the 90th anniversary of the founding of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. Today's topic, Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, Why We Must Fight for Women's Rights Long After the Headlines Have Faded, will feature keynote remarks from Lina, AbiRafeh, and the Q&A, including questions from our audience. So please get those ready. As the fanfare surrounding the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan and the subsequent Taliban takeover of the country dies down, we will explore how we consistently fail in our fight for women's rights and what we need to do to start succeeding. In the context of the summit's theme, Into the Depths, exploring this global moment, we hope to address the current state of inter-country conflict and what can be done as it relates to women's rights, and really looking at these issues from a global perspective, including right here at home. Here at the Council, our vision is a globally minded and globally connected world that is equitable and just for all. We launched this vision just this week with our new mission and our new strategic plan and our new website. So please check that out at worldpittsburgh.org. We recognize that we cannot do this work without our partners, whose collaboration widens our audience and pushes us to spark bold thoughts. We're very thankful of our community partner for the entire summit, PUMP, as well as our sponsors, UPMC Health Plan, Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Jones Day. For us, our theme of Into the Depths also means moving away from one and done talks to recurring programs where we go deeper and share in a continuous global learning journey with speakers like Lina, who joined us earlier this year and is now back. Now, it's my great pleasure to welcome back Lina AbiRafeh to close out our summit with a keynote. Dr. Lina AbiRafeh is the Executive Director of the Arab Institute for Women at the Lebanese American University based in New York and Lebanon. Prior to joining AIW, Lina spent over 20 years in development and humanitarian contexts, working with the United Nations and other international organizations in countries such as Afghanistan, Haiti, Democratic Republic of Congo, Nepal, and others. Lina completed her doctoral work from the London School of Economics and published Gender and International Aid in Afghanistan, the Politics and Effects of Intervention, based on her research. She speaks and publishes frequently on a range of gender issues such as gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health and rights, what's holding Arab women back from equality, bodily integrity and autonomy, female humanitarian aid workers, and women in conflict. In 2018, Lina was listed as one of the Gender Equality Top 100, the most influential people in global policy, one of only 2 Arabs to make the list. And she received this honor again in 2019 from over 9,000 nominations. It's now my great pleasure to welcome Lina AbiRafeh. Take it away, Lina.
Thank you for that incredible introduction. It all sounds very serious. What I really am is this. I'm a feminist and I'm an activist. And that is what gets me up in the morning. And that is what I wake up for every single day. I want to start with a story, because when we talk about what's going on in the world with women's rights or lack thereof, it is something that obviously affects all of us. I think there is a tendency that we have to talk about women's issues and violations of women's rights and situations like what's happening now in Afghanistan as if they take place in a vacuum, or as if they happen to other women over there in places that are remote and inaccessible and incomprehensible to us. But really, these things are all around us. They are right here and right now. And the only way to realize that is to understand the landscape, to get a sense of what's happening for women around the world. What does the world look like for us as women in our homes and our communities and our countries? And when we see that, you never can unsee it. You find that no country in the world has achieved equality, and that we still have a very long way to go. And the fight is frustrating, is fractured, and is filled with disconnects, and is not linear. Even when we have gained certain rights, it does not mean that we can go to sleep soundly, because we are at constant risk of losing them. So with all of that, I want to start at the beginning and talk about how I first became aware of all this, because I think unless we state who we are, what our position is, we'll never understand each other's perspectives. And if we don't understand that, we fail to understand what galvanizes people, what moves people, what creates movements, right? A feminist movement, for instance, and a group of people who are willing and ready to move in the same direction. So for me, my background is an important story. Who I am is an important story, because that will tell you why and where I fight. So I'm Lebanese and Palestinian. I could probably end the story there because it's already complicated enough. That lays a great foundation for thinking about gender issues, particularly in context of conflict. I was raised between Saudi Arabia and the US, and I could probably end the story there because also that is complicated enough. So with all of those disconnects and all those hyphens in my identity, it seemed like a natural thing to question everything that I saw and to ask about women's roles and women's rights and responsibilities and inequalities and violence. But I didn't really put a name to it until I was 14, which actually is still quite young. I was in the US at that time in high school in a class called Comparative Women's History. And I thought, well, this is a curious class. Let me see what this is about. Let me learn about our history. But in fact, it wasn't about history as much as it was about the history of violence against women that has been perpetrated against women in every space and time, in every culture, in every context, in every country, in every religion, every socioeconomic level, every race, everyone. And I was absolutely overwhelmed. I was devastated. So 14-year-old me is suddenly in a classroom hearing about female genital mutilation and bridal burning and what a bound foot looks like and how that even happened, about sexual violence, about breast augmentation and eating disorders, about women who had tried so desperately to fit into a corset they would break their ribs to do it. I thought, this is a rotten world and this is a rotten history. And that made me mad. And it is precisely what made me mad that galvanized me into action. I speak a lot to young people and I say, it really is, it's the power of anger that creates these movements, anger that is used in a way to make change. It's that point where you say, okay, this thing has just punched me in the gut and I can no longer sit by and let it happen. And so that was 14-year-old me. And now here I am more than 30 plus years later, still fighting the same fight. And I didn't think I'd be doing it this long. I didn't think we'd have this problem for this long. I actually thought we'd be done by now. And I think by all accounts, we should be done by now, because the fact that we have failed to achieve equality for more than half of the global population, frankly, baffles me. We are, as a world, as a planet, 100 years away from equality. Personally, I'm not going to stick around and wait for that to happen. I am feeling extremely impatient. 100 years until we can say that we have equal rights in health, in education, in the economy, in politics, certainly, all around the world, everywhere. We're still fighting for those very, very basic things. And what we know is that when we talk about equality, it's not just about us. Equality is better for everyone. Equality is the critical foundation, in my opinion, for a just and sustainable world, the kind of world that we all deserve to live in. It's a human rights principle. It's a precondition for anything that is stable and decent and prosperous. But here we are, not one single country has achieved it. Every country in the world, we're still struggling for space in the economy, in politics, in public life. We have less choice, we have less voice. And what's more, and this is baffling to me, it's always women that are responsible for fixing the problem. The people who are working on women's rights and equality are overwhelmingly female, as if we caused the problem in the first place. So why is achieving equality viewed as women's work? That also baffles me, because I think we have plenty to do already. But if we go by different sectors, let me start with the best one, because the education sector actually is the most promising. I think there are very few people who will disagree with the value of an education and the effects that that has on a girl, on a woman, on the family, on the community, on society, on the country, and so on. So the gap in terms of the gender gap in education, that's going to be closed in about 12 years or so at the present pace, which is good. That's great news. But at the same time, around the world, the vast majority of children who are out of school are girls. And there are still about 500 million women and girls who are illiterate today. I am speaking a lot about Afghanistan these days because it's near and dear to my heart, and it is a place where I lived and worked and continue to work remotely. When I moved to Afghanistan, the illiteracy rate for women was 96%. 96% of women in the country who could not read or write. That's worth just thinking about for a second. And now it's maybe 70 some percent. That's an improvement, sure, in 20 years, but that's not good enough. That is simply not good enough. And there's a huge discrepancy between rural and urban areas, obviously everywhere around the world, but Afghanistan as well. Rural girls are just not able to access school. It is not safe. They are not available. They have family commitments. They have sociocultural restrictions. Patriarchy certainly weighs down on them very heavily. So with all of these things, we're still not, that's the best we've got. That's all we've got to offer in terms of progress. And that's, for me, that's just not good enough. But even worse when we talk about something like politics and women's presence in public and political life and leadership and decision making. In every country, in every aspect of senior leadership, that is where the inequality is the most visible because women are invisible. It is unbelievable that we still don't have women leaders or too few women leaders. We don't have enough women heads of state, heads of companies. They're still seen as the exception and the first, and they're not the norm. We still treat it as, oh my goodness, here's a woman CEO and a woman president. I mean, it is an anomaly. It is almost like a freak show. Only 20 some countries in the world have actually had a woman who is the head of the government or head of the state. So many countries have never had a woman leader. And we talk about that as if there are absolutely no women who could be qualified to lead. When I think, considering the mess that most of the world is in, we'd be far better off having women in leadership than men. I'm convinced that they do it better. And actually what we've seen as a result of the COVID pandemic is women leaders of countries have had better outcomes, have been more proactive in terms of protecting their populations, in responding to COVID, in understanding the gendered dynamics of the pandemic, in looking after human rights, health outcomes, and all the things that are important for a sustainable and healthy society. So women leaders are actually doing it better. That's not my opinion. That's, that's common knowledge. Let's call that fact. I'd like to think it's fact. It should be accepted fact. For me, what really lit the fire of anger was violence, as I said. And at 14, understanding the different forms of violence against women for me was just appalling, because we can talk about rights to the economy and access to health and education and putting in quotas for women's participation in politics. But all of that is pointless if we are not safe in our homes, on the streets, in the market, in schools, in the office, in public office, everywhere. And we aren't. No one anywhere, none of us. We all the time have that cloud that hangs over us about our own safety. And of course, we clearly are responsible for our own safety, and we are to blame if anything happens to us, which again is still baffling. So for us to be safe, to have freedom from violence, for me, is the very first thing. It is the critical prerequisite. It is the most important foundation upon which all the other rights can then be enjoyed. But without that, if we still have intimate partner violence, if we still have sexual violence, if we cannot be safe in our countries, protected by law, well, what are we really doing? If we still have to, even here in this country and everywhere, if we still have to tell our female friends, call me when you get home and carry your keys carefully so you can poke somebody in the eye if they come up behind you. I mean, it's becoming ridiculous. We don't even realize how much we've internalized that fear of violence, because even the fear of violence is actually a form of violence. We are looking at laws that discriminate against women that don't even count violence, that don't protect women against violence. In Lebanon in 2014, for instance, there was a great push and almost a great celebration for the implementation of the domestic violence law. But at the last minute, they removed the provision on marital rape because they said, well, that's marriage, isn't it? I mean, marital rape didn't make any sense to anybody there. And that's not just Lebanon, that's lots of countries actually, where ultimately what they're telling you as a woman is, well, rape, okay, we'll deal with that. That might be illegal. We're not necessarily going to give you any access to justice, because you're going to have to be re-victimized through the courts and through security and through the media and through all sorts of systems that are out to get you, if you would like your perpetrator to be jailed, as I would imagine anybody should, as I would imagine a effective justice system would do. But what I'm saying is that with cases of sexual violence, we never see access to justice. We don't see the results of actually seeking justice. So for women, living as living in a marriage, for instance, ultimately means, if you choose to get married, that you surrender the rights to your body in most of these countries, right? If marital rape is not considered rape, and that is not considered a crime, right? To go back to the case of Lebanon, well, you don't own the rights to your own body. You can't make choices about your body, about your sexuality, about when and where and why and with whom to have sex, to get married, to have children, all of those things that are still restricted in so many countries. Girl-child marriage, for instance, we talk about it like it's early marriage, we say. Well, early marriage sounds like a descriptor, an adjective. It sounds fairly benign, like you've just had an early lunch. In fact, it is a crime. It is, in effect, girl-child marriage. And when it is the marriage of a girl child, it's by and large to an older man. And when that happens, that is by and large a sexual relationship, and sex between an older man and a girl, an underage girl, is called rape. So even in the way that we talk about these kinds of things, these crimes, we almost water them down. So we don't refer to them as they actually are. And I think we really need to be very careful of all those things, because again, as long as we're living in a world where violence against women is perpetrated by and large by men at the rate that it is everywhere. I mean, what was it, yesterday or the day before, we finally saw some justice for Sarah Everard in the UK. We very often do not see justice for women here in this country, in the US, nor anywhere around the world. And when we talk about women's rights and access to justice and rights to our own bodies, look at Texas. I don't know if I need to say any more about that, but Texas looks like the Taliban. It's not all that different to me. So in any case, what I really want to say, as time slips away from us so very quickly, is that we have to constantly be vigilant. 20 years ago, well, more than 20 years ago, I'll tell you the story of how I ended up in Afghanistan. I was, as you can imagine, the angry 14-year-old who was committed to working on women's rights and to ending violence against women. Where I was just, wherever I could get my hands on it, I would do whatever I could. When I was in graduate school in 1996, I was working on women's human rights in a certain organization. And at that time, it was just around the time that the Taliban took over Kabul and subsequently all of Afghanistan for the first time, so 1996. And my supervisor said, well, you're working on women's rights globally right now, but we really need you to focus just on Afghanistan, just for the time being, while we figure out what is going on over there. Well, that work in 1996 launched an interest that I still have to this day. How many years later? 25 years later. I'm still interested in, involved in, active in women's rights in Afghanistan, because at that time, for me, that just seemed like the most impossible situation, so difficult. We couldn't even get there as much as I wanted to at that stage. It wasn't until after 9/11 that I was able to go to Afghanistan, where I lived and worked for 4 years. And in that time, what I learned was I was working with a team of entirely Afghans, women and men, and running an organization that in that first year at least was supporting 3,000 Afghan women. So it was incredible, and it was overwhelming, and it was humbling, in fact, because at the end of the day, I am not Afghan. So I really had to learn from them, learn from Afghan women who had been doing the work all along and who will continue to do it now that so much of the aid is frozen or has dropped off. What's important about that is 2 decades of aid in Afghanistan has put us, for the most part, right back to where we started. So you've got to ask, and I'm asking the question right now as I sit here and write a book on Afghan women, which is a follow-up to my first book that was published in 2009. to say, you know, what happened? Where did the money go? Where did the effort go? Did the rhetoric match the reality? Absolutely, it did not. We talked so much about women's rights and liberation and empowerment in very big words and strong buzzwords and all sorts of aid speak, coming into Afghanistan thinking that we were going to save Afghan women, when in effect, that money really didn't go to the right places, to the right people, to the right groups, to the grassroots, to women themselves. It actually served in many ways to undermine some of the Afghan women's movements, the indigenous feminist movements that were already there on the ground, the people who were doing the work, who were helping those who needed help, who knew how to get to them, knew what they needed, were active and embedded in communities. The very groups we talk about prioritizing when we say Afghan women are in the lead, and this is part of the localization agenda, which is another great buzzword that I love. Localization, meaning we're going to make sure that the local people are in the lead. But actually, they were not. And so now we've come back, we've come full circle. Unfortunate for Afghan women, unfortunate for Afghanistan, unfortunate for the world. And what a shame, and shame on us, really, for not having delivered for them the way that we should have. But part of what I want to say, and part of what I think I should say to conclude, is I don't want to end on a grim note, because at the end of the day, Afghan women are still out there doing the work that they know needs doing. They have gone underground once again. They are laying low. They are waiting to see what might happen and how they can continue to support themselves, to educate their girls, to get the help and training and services that they know needs doing. So the idea right now is to not lose focus, not pay attention. I think we have an attention deficit disorder when it comes to these kinds of issues and to human tragedies. Today we're talking about Afghanistan. Well, it's October. We've retained that for about 2 months. By November, we'll be talking about something else. We'll be talking about another tragedy. And this is not a short-term quick fix thing. If you're looking for solving the problem of women's rights, or for fostering equality, or for speeding up that 100-year gap so we can actually close it and go on with the rest of our lives, it's a long haul thing. We have to be in it until the end. And like I said from the very beginning, I do wake up every day for this, and I'll do this until I drop dead, because I actually don't see how I can't. I don't see how any of us can't. I feel a responsibility to do it. I feel like it's the most important thing I could possibly do with my time on Earth. And I also feel like I owe it. I owe it to the next generation. You know, I keep saying, I have a niece and she's 7. And I look at her and I think, I am committed to leaving this place better for her than it was when I was 7. In fact, I'd like her to think that all of my concerns and all of my stories, all of my ideas and all of my efforts are outdated and in fact comical. I'd like her to have access to every opportunity, every space, every place, all the time, regardless of who she is, what she wears, what she does, what she says, full freedom and opportunity, and nothing less than that. And it is not negotiable. And I hope I can live to see it, because actually, I don't think anybody wants to do this kind of work. I don't think anybody sets out to fix these problems and to exist in perpetual misery. I could be doing a lot of other things with my time, but right now, my time is best spent doing this. And I hope that all of you who are listening are just as angry as I am and will continue to do the work that you know needs doing, because otherwise we'll never actually get it done. I'm going to stop there for a second and see if there are questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Lina, for all of your insight and your passion and your anger. I love this call to harness our anger in productive and positive and important ways now. So make good trouble, right? We do have a question from the audience that we'll pull in, and we have some other questions that we'll also engage with you on, but I want to remind everyone, please do submit those questions. And I'm excited to get us started with a question from Connor, who's a youth leader and a high school student. And Connor says, I've been reading 1,000 Splendid Suns for my English class, which centers around the Taliban's takeover of Kabul and has themes of women's rights. What role does literature, specifically fiction, play in general education about women's rights globally?
Oh, that is a beautiful question. You know, I think we can learn so much, and we really get to the spirit of people and how they think and what they value when we look at literature, fiction, absolutely. When we look at poetry, when we look at stories, when we look at fables, whatever it is that guides a population or a community, it helps us understand what they think and what they value. I love that. In fact, when I've traveled to some countries, I've deliberately saved some of the literature to read when I am on the plane or in the space or in that country, because it really brings it to life in a way that's so much more meaningful than reading a list of statistics. You know, at the end of the day, I can tell you all sorts of numbers and percentages about how bad things are or what people need, what people aren't getting, but it's not going to be the same as that beautiful and almost magical deep dive into somebody else's life that you get from literature. So I love that. That's a fantastic question. And I hope you're enjoying that book. It broke my heart.
Thank you for that, Lina. We have been talking this week also on the importance of humanizing the individuals we're talking about, the stories that we're talking about, and that does come through that storytelling in different forms. Another follow-up question here: how can men be advocates for women's rights? I know that you mentioned it shouldn't only be women fighting for women's rights, but how can we strike a balance between advocating and overpowering?
Oh, that's beautifully put. Also, you guys are amazing. You know, I think men and boys really have a responsibility. I think it's the collective. You know, it is first of all, the fundamental belief that has to guide us is that equality is better for everyone. Equality is better for individuals, for communities, for societies, for countries. You know, there is a lot of research actually that shows that for countries, their best chance of peace and prosperity and progress are really based on how the country treats its women. It's not about the economy. It's not about the kind of government. It's about if we're treating and valuing everybody as equals. So I think it's that, first of all, start with that thinking as your non-negotiable foundation. We are all equal and we are all deserving of the same rights and the same space, the same joys, the same opportunities, everything. And use that belief to share with other people. Share that in your family, with your parents and your children and your peers and whatever. You know, I when I speak to young guys, actually, I think they have it they've got an interesting position, because it's when you are young that you start to think about these things and you lay the foundation for your future actions and beliefs. So you start to think about if women and girls are equal or not. It's in the things that you say and what you do and your playground practices and all of that stuff. So how do you, as a young kind of self-aware guy who believes in equality, as I know you do, how do you turn to other guys and say, you know what, stop, that's enough. Don't do that. Don't say that. Call things out when you see them. Because, you know, if I come in there as a grumpy old woman, like, it's just not going to be the same. But if you all are, policing is not the right word, but if you all are supporting, correcting, and gently guiding your peer group, I think that can be really powerful. The fact is, we are surrounded by discriminations. We are surrounded by sexism and racism and all sorts of other isms that we have to drag around. But it's our responsibility as good humans to say, you know what, that's not right. And you can, you know, there are ways to do that that are gentle, that are instructive, that are that present an opportunity for learning and conversation. I want to believe that some people do this out of ignorance, not out of malice. But at the same time, you know, if you're going to be that vigilante that's calling everything out on the streets, be careful, because, you know, we always put ourselves at risk when we do that. But I still think we can step up for each other and be there for each other. And I also think we can step back and create space and let people speak their own stories and have their own voice and share their own experiences. And then we have to believe them. You know, we can listen all day, but if we dismiss it, what is the point? So there's that as well. And I've seen that done pretty effectively in classrooms and boardrooms and workspaces and whatever, where men say, okay, let's, you know, Lina, you tell us. And creating that space, especially if you're, you know, trying to fight for it, it's exhausting to have to do that by yourself. I've seen men and you know, young men on the street be more conscious of how they are approaching women. You know, it's not funny when you're a group of guys and I'm alone on the street at midnight and you kind of, follow or track, or, I mean, that might seem like an innocent sort of play or a joke. It's not. I don't want to be afraid on the street. I should not be afraid on the street. So how do you kind of correct your own behavior and the behavior of other men? There are so many ways to do that. There are opportunities around you all the time. And on that note, what I really want to say, and I probably should have said earlier, is that people ask me a lot, well, how can I do this and how can I get involved? And, how do I have to do it how you did it? You absolutely do not have to go out into the fields for 2 decades in 20 countries. No, you don't have to. I gave a TEDx talk a couple of years ago, now many years ago, where I said, you have to start where you stand. And what I meant by that is look around the space that you occupy and make that a space that respects equality. Make that a space that is feminist. Make that a space that is progressive and open and safe. You can do that. You can do that in your home. You can do that on your street. There are so many opportunities for it. It's like people who want to be more conscious of their environmental impact. Like if you want to do something good for the environment, you don't have to go and strap yourself to a tractor or get on a Greenpeace ship bound for Antarctica. What you can do is actually just take the can out of the trash and put it in the recycling bin. And it is the cumulative effect of very small gestures in your space that are going to be impactful in the long run, and also contagious, right? I think all behavior is contagious, but let's make it good behavior. It's better. So I think all those kinds of things, be that person. Yeah. I think you already are by asking that question.
Yeah, we all are already part of something, right? Whether it's the neighborhood that we live in, whether it's a place of worship, whether it's our school or our employer. So we're already in spaces that we could be leading in change. Follow-up question, or a different question here from Mark. Given the ever deepening polarization in the US, are there any Republican women potential presidential candidates that impress you sufficiently, either on domestic or international issues, that you'd like, or at least wouldn't mind having a chance to get your message or policies during the primary process? And if that person were actually to win, what do you think the country's reaction would be? This is a big loaded question.
That's a big, and I don't even have an answer because, I don't even have an answer because I've not actually been close enough to the process. And I don't feel comfortable with names and endorsing candidates and stuff like that. That's really not what I will do. What I will say is, we really need to understand what people are saying and see if they're going to actually do what they say. I'm very protective of women's rights and very careful about how people use language and make commitments. And I think we really need to be conscious of that. And we need to vote our values and we need to spend our values, right? Like, where do we put our money? Where do we put our ballots? Where do we, we have a role to play in that. So, is it about this woman better than that one? That's, it really depends. Do I think that, having any woman in office is important? No, I don't think it's about having a female body just occupy a seat, because there's lots of difference and diversity in that. I also think that women's presence in those seats doesn't necessarily mean women's power, right? So how are we also making sure that those spaces are enabling so that we can actually get things done? That's the idea behind like quota systems, which I believe in because we need to level the playing field. We need a push. Still don't necessarily mean that change has been this instant thing with 25% women in parliament, for instance, Afghanistan, right? So there's a lot of nuance and a long-term effort for this. So that's not the answer to your question, but that's my answer.
That's great. And there certainly are ways to investigate each of the candidates, whatever their gender identity might be, and see what their voting rights, what they've actually done in the past. And that's an important tool as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a really interesting transition in this country, the way that we are dealing with all sorts of civil rights issues, the way we're dealing with bodily autonomy and integrity, again, Texas, and other states, right? We really have to question what it is that we believe. And do we have the same beliefs? I mean, it's been pretty polarizing. And I think that we need to be conscious of that.
And that's an incredibly important point too, of how certain issues that are human rights issues get polarized into political issues, when what we're talking about fundamentally are rights that are deserved. Pivoting again here, we have a question specifically about from John that he'd like you to comment on a recent book by Hudson, Bowen, and Nielsen, The First Political Order, How Sex Shapes Governance and National Security Worldwide. He gives a little bit of context in case you have not read the book. I have not. But he says that they rank 176 countries on a scale for what they call the patrilineal fraternal syndrome. So a composite of such things as unequal treatment of women in family law, property rights, early marriage, a lot of what you've spoken to, and whether or not, you know, violence against women and societal attitudes towards it, for example, whether rape is seen as a property crime against men. Do you think, the question is, do you think this type of analysis is starting to affect how governments and political leaders develop and implement policy? The author's premise is that countries that treat females badly are also poorer and less stable. Do you have any reactions to that?
Okay, I agree with that premise. Absolutely. First of all, and as I said, that, you know, we know from research and evidence everywhere that countries are better off when there is equality. They have a better chance of peace. They have a better chance of prosperity. They have a better chance of progress. They have a better chance of achieving sustainable development goals, however you want to measure it. Indices like the one you're referring to, and I have not read that book, I need to write that down, are really valuable because countries don't like to be called out. And it creates a sense of accountability, because it's kind of awkward and embarrassing to be the last on the list. You know, right now with the gender gap, for instance, Afghanistan has the world's widest gender gap. You don't want to be that country. It gives you an incentive. It gives you a reason to move. And that might not come from a genuine place, but it's a start. Let's put pressure on countries in whatever ways we can. So not just through this, not just through these systems of measurement, because there are many. There is the Women, Peace and Security Index. UNDP has one. There's a Gender Development Index. There is the Global Gender Gap Report with the World Economic Forum that I referred to. There are many, and I think they all have a value. I think that the more that we examine countries and look at what they say and what they do and how they treat their citizens, the more accountable they're likely to be to those citizens. So absolutely, I agree. And I've got to read that book once I finish my book.
There you go, right?
I have 1 week. I probably should have mentioned I have 1 week until my deadline for this book on Afghan women. So we are in the no sleep, no eat, no nothing phase of writing, which I don't wish upon any one of you. And that's simply because this issue is so important and so timely that the book has to get out ASAP. But no one should ever write a book in less than a month. That's not what wise people would do.
Well, if there's one person to do it, I'm not surprised that it's you. So we look forward to getting all the details and sharing that with our community. We have another question here from another youth leader in our community, youth fellow on our team. What did the indigenous feminist movement look like in Afghanistan before the war started? What accomplishments did the movement make? And did it last through the US withdrawal? This is from Ben.
Awesome. Okay, so Afghanistan has had like 4 decades of wars. There have been lots of wars. There's Soviet occupation, there's the Civil War, there's the Taliban occupation, which is a war against women, clearly, and many other things. There was a constant conflict and insecurity across these last 2 decades, and now we've got the Taliban again. So, you know, war is an unfortunate part of what Afghans have dealt with for decades. So that first off, but the important thing is that Afghan women's groups and the indigenous feminist movements were operating, were working, were finding people who needed help and finding creative ways to get to them and helping them. So for instance, during the Taliban era, so the first Taliban era, 1996 to 2001, the Taliban banned girls from going to school. So the women's groups set up underground secret schools. Maybe you heard about this. I thought this was just incredible. They risked their own lives to make sure that they could educate their girls. And they did this through these networks so that girls could come and continue to go to school. And they're going to do that again. They will find ways to get women access to financial support, to healthcare, to whatever they need. I think in those kinds of times and with those constraints, they find creative ways to be able to get their needs met. It's not what I wish for them or what I want for them. I think it's impossible to build a country on such shaky ground and when there's no stability and there's no safety, especially for women, it makes it very difficult to have a viable state at all. But at the same time, these groups are resourceful and they will always get it done. So they're about to do that again. We just don't know what's going to happen in terms of aid and support, or how we on the outside can effectively support them. But those are the groups who know the country, the context, the communities, the nuance. They know how to navigate. They know where the potential pitfalls are. They know how to avoid risks. They know how to position things in ways that are strategic to get buy-in. Because when we come in from the outside, it tends to be clumsy. We are not experts. We are not natives to that place. We are not the ones who know. So we always have to come in with a sense of humility, if you will, what we can and can't do. Can we bring in the tools, the resources? Absolutely. Can we bring in some global good practice and guidance and ideas? Absolutely. But are we there to hijack the movements? Absolutely not. It's these women's groups who are the ones who know, and we have to take our cue from them. We have to actually let them tell us what they need, and then we have to just go do those things.
What a concept.
So doesn't it seem easy, right? It seems so easy. Anyway,
no.
I wish it were so.
Right. No, absolutely. And this also reminds me, in preparation for our conversation today, we were talking about these simple realities of just paying attention to what's in front of us, what's happening now, and our tendency to kind of fetishize or fetishization. I'm butchering the words here, but you know what I'm saying in terms of your quote of how news stories, whether it's Afghanistan or the global South generally, get fetishized. And then we move on to the next, and then we move on to the next. Can you share a little bit more about what it means to fetishize these stories about women experiencing violence and oppression in Afghanistan and the global South, and maybe lean more into what we need to be paying and holding our attention on? Again, simple truths.
Mm-hmm. Well, starting with the simple truth is that there is inequality everywhere. There is violence against women everywhere. And the danger is when we don't look around and see it right in front of us, around us, with our friends and our family and our community, but we look at it as something that happens to other women over there. And in places like Afghanistan that are remote, that are in conflict, that are poor, that are Muslim also, there's some very dangerous trends that we have. We're lazy when we analyze these things. We say, well, that's Muslim women, and that's the veil, and that's the burqa, and that's, the way that they live, and that's their religion, and that's culture. We've got all these different excuses that we kind of throw to help us kind of rationalize it. But in the end, it isn't about the other women over there. It's about women everywhere. And part of the problem and the danger in fetishizing what has happened and continues to happen to Afghan women is that we used this idea of the miserable kind of victim beneath a burqa as a creature that needed saving, and only we could save her. And so in we come, and it was very dismissive. It was patronizing. It was neocolonialist. It was wrong in so many ways. And the idea that for us, the biggest deal, and I say us meaning people on the outside, the biggest deal was the burqa or the veil or any kind of wardrobe choice, whether it is by choice on behalf of the women or by force, actually is not really for us to say. Part of the challenge is that that symbol became the symbol of the entire intervention in so many ways. We said, well, the burqa is the thing, and removal of the burqa is going to be the right thing, and so that's the way we gotta go. And what we missed is the rest of the story, the backstory, where Afghan women were using the burqa to, first of all, alert us to what was going on with the Taliban by smuggling cameras underneath and videoing that and sending it to us. So it was a subversive tool of feminist activism already. But before that, it was a tool for freedom and mobility. Part of the problem is when a country, when a government, when a fundamentalist regime comes and says that you have to do it by force, that's a problem. And I get that. And I absolutely do not deny that, because I firmly believe that women should be free to wear what they want, go where they want, say what they want, and so on. Burqa or not, hijab or not, it doesn't matter. But when we are arguing against those kinds of things, we have to do it in a way that is nuanced and that reflects what Afghan women or any women actually believe and what they want and what they see as important. And for them at that point, and again today, it is not as important to argue against the burqa as it is to argue for financial support and economic empowerment and safety and mobility, actually, that the burqa does bring. So we risk being kind of overly simplistic in the way that we understand what these women's issues are, without actually looking around at our own issues. So it really, ultimately, it's about holding a mirror to ourselves and understanding that it's not about superficial choices of wardrobe or religious kind of symbols, as much as it is about the freedom and mobility and access and voice and choice that women feel that they have. And who else can decide that but the women themselves who are implicated in it, whether they're beneath a burqa or not.
You touched earlier on a lot of this was further fueled after 9/11, right? And you touched on September 11th, 20 years this year. Obviously, this has prompted numerous articles, documentaries, interviews reflecting on that day and United States actions thereafter, and many reflections. Can you share some of your own on what happened in the field of women's rights globally in the 20 years following the attack? What do you see as the next steps governments around the world are looking to advance women's rights and individuals too, right? As you said, it's a collective. It's the yes and.
I think, it's been interesting because there is a lot of conversation about it. It is something that is in the news all the time. We appear to be more clear in our values and in our commitments. There's a younger generation of people, women and men both, who are much stronger than we ever were. It's actually very promising for me because this means I can retire. In terms of what they value and what they believe, they put their money where their mouth is, I think, in ways that they understand that. They understand rights, they understand justice, they understand civil liberties, they understand those things in much more profound ways than we did. And I think that's, natural evolution. And so I think that's definitely a positive change. But now we are much more critical in terms of looking at the impact on women of anything that's happening in the world, of policy and legislation, of conflict and peace, of big business, of whatever it is. We just pay attention in ways that are different, are better. So I think that's very promising. The conversation, though, needs to now turn into something concrete. There's always the gap between what is the rhetoric and then what is actually done and delivered. Is there enough funding for women's rights and grassroots groups? Is there enough space? Is there enough recognition? Are the laws in the right place? Do we feel better, safer, stronger in the streets, in schools, at work? Do we feel like there is more respect and recognition? There's dignity and equality. Do we feel those things really, or are we just talking them? I think we have, in some ways, opened up that conversation, which is fantastic and so important, and I think a critical first step. But we don't want it to be tokenistic. We don't want to say, well, oh, we did a gender empowerment training or whatever kind of thing. Check, great. Everybody did their training. Everybody did their online course on sexual harassment. Okay, yawn. What's next? It's not a tick boxy kind of thing, right? It's a long haul, continuous conversation where collectively we're all learning about how to be better humans. So, I think we're passing a kind of moment where we feel like there could almost be a backlash because when we're pushing those kinds of things on the agenda, people then say, all right, well, can I not say that? Can I not be alone in an elevator with you? Are you going to accuse me of sexual harassment? I love those kinds of questions. I think they're so funny because, are you Neanderthal? Are you not able to control yourself? If this was another guy in the elevator, would you automatically touch their butt? Why is that difficult? So there is a little bit of that pushback, but we're just, we're learning how to negotiate those kind of boundaries and have those conversations. And I think that's important. But in terms of states and countries, absolutely, there is more of a willingness. There is more accountability, but, still, we have a long way to go. Do I want to see what things are going to look like 20 years from now? Sigh, It's moving slow, right? I wish it would move faster.
I hear that and appreciate your point on there's no, single serving solutions to real big and important issues. We have one more question from the audience. Connor, would love to hear what you think about social media and women's rights. Are there implications of activism becoming only reposting infographics or retweeting a hit tweet? So if you can share your reaction there, that would be great.
Oh, great question. Okay, social media is one of those mysteries to me because I came into that game very late. Everybody was starting to tweet and I was still out in the field, like running around a war zone. And so I missed the boat with social media stuff. And now I wonder, am I too late to catch up? It's one of those very weird things. So it's a tension I've never been able to resolve. But I recognize the power that it has. It is huge in terms of galvanizing people, connecting movements and networks and individuals. Look at something like Me Too. Me Too is amazing for that because it really just brought out this conversation and changed the way people think and they talk about those kinds of issues. But at the same time, it's brought a lot of risks, right? It's brought new forms of violence and new discriminations. In my very kind of amateur tweeting, right? If I tweet something like, hashtag feminist or yes, all women or whatever, I can just like TikTok, look at my watch and wait until I get some troll back, making some incredibly vulgar comment or a threat that I will not repeat. Because it is just far too foul. But I try not to read them. I try to block. But it is scary. It is disturbing, and we hide behind our screens and say things that we would never say to people's faces. And I think that the way that we deal with people who don't agree with us is more and more hostile and violent and venomous. And I think that's very dangerous because it almost gives you this space that you think is safe behind your screen to unleash some horrible things that you would never have in what I like to think is civilized conversation between individuals face to face. But at the same time, do the benefits outweigh the risks of this? In many ways they do, as much as the landscape is scary and trolling is powerful. And what sometimes is said behind a screen doesn't always stay behind a screen. There are a lot of women who've experienced real life risks as a result of what they've said or tweeted or posted. So there, those are some challenges as well. One thing though, is that it still is a very, there's something exclusive about it, right? It is in English most of the time. It is very Western driven. We tend to assume that the opinion is formed by people who are tweeting it. But if a tree falls in the forest and no one tweets it, like, did it happen? Who are the voices that we're missing? Who are the people who are left out? Who are those who are not connected or just not speaking? I think that is something that we need to be constantly conscious of. People for Me Too, people ask me a lot about, where is Me Too in the Arab region? How come there's no Arab Me Too? And I said, well, there is a question about benefit costs and the benefit and the risk, right? If women felt like they could Me Too safely in that public space, attach their name to it or whatever name to it, and that the benefits would outweigh the risks, they would do it. But because there's no systems and services and support and legislation and protection, and they run the risk of being shamed or ostracized or worse by Me Tooing, they're not going to do it. So, we have to recognize that when there is silence, when there are gaps, when there is something missing in the conversation, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that it's not a space where it can be said. So not everything that is worth hearing is said on social media. At the same time, the idea of, reposting and retweeting and all of that stuff is a start. But, what do you call it? Collectivism, right? It's not enough. It's never enough. I think people are learning maybe how to pay attention and to read and to understand, what they're sharing. I'm not going to share something that I don't necessarily believe in. If there's a post that says, that women are not safe and they should be, and they don't have rights to their bodies and they should have them, I subscribe to that position. So I will share it and retweet it and repost it and whatever we do to it. But I will, I would have read it. And I think that we just need to make sure that we're understanding that is a starting point and not an end point to any kind of activism. That is just contributing to the conversation, parroting what's already been said, but also, take the time to think and to learn and to read and understand and listen and pay attention, because, whatever you are sharing, might have an impact somewhere. Something that you say could touch someone else, hopefully in positive ways, but sometimes in negative ways. And so I think we really need to just understand the power of this very scary place, actually, and how we can use it. But more than anything, what else do we do, right? It's not going to be a substitute for anything that is in our real lives. So that's not where our duty ends. It's where it begins for some of us.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love your point earlier on, well, this idea again of no single serving solutions, and knowing when to walk alongside, when to walk ahead. If you do have that power, and this is a platform that can be used for that, knowing when to walk behind. Thank you, Lina. You are the epitome of speaking truth to power. Love hearing your insight. Can't wait to read your next book. Please stay once you finish writing it this week. Again, so impactful. Today's program, everyone, was recorded and will be made available for viewing in the coming days. The theme of our summit this year was Into the Depths, Exploring This Global Moment. And throughout the week, we looked at how we gather around global issues and created a space to go deeper and meaningfully revisit topics we discussed throughout this year, just like we did today with Lina. We believe in learning together and building community, again, rather than any one and done programming that only scratches the surface. These issues are too complex, too important, too urgent. We hope you felt that there was value throughout the summit this week, and that you stick with us. In addition to the programs from this week, we are also continuing the celebration for our 90th birthday. We have our 90 for 90 campaign, which is 90 days celebrating our 90 years and encouraging the community to clock 90 miles. As Lina said earlier, you start right where you are. So we believe in connecting with the world by starting exactly with the world at your feet. Join us. We'll have a community ride that connects Pittsburghers to global themes in our region on our last one of these on October 9th. So mark your calendars and join us. We will be continuing the celebration next year too, because we want to be in person with all of you. So we will be in person celebrating our 90+1. So stay tuned for our birthday celebration in spring of 2022. Thank you to all of our partners that made today possible. Pump, our lead community partner, and our generous sponsors, UPMC Health Plan, Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Jones Day. If you enjoyed this program or any other program you participated in during the summit, please consider supporting the council by making a donation today. Check out our brand new website, worldpittsburgh.org. And thank you all so very much. Thank you, Lina.
Bravo. Thank you.
Until next time.